Can I move to Portugal with savings? The answer to that is yes, or at least that's the short answer, but it's not quite what you think. You can't just come to Portugal and say, hey, I've got money in the bank, I want to live here. But you can come to Portugal with savings in a few specific examples. Now, I'm going to run through visas first, and then we'll cover EU citizens, because for EU, EEA, and Swiss citizens, things are a little bit easier. The first and the main visa that is aimed at those with savings is the Golden Visa. Okay, so the Golden Visa is for those who can invest in Portugal, who can put 500,000 euros into an investment. Sometimes it's slightly less if it's in certain conditions, but typically 500,000 euros. Normally, these days, most people invest in a fund. So this could be invested in something like agriculture or startups or renewable energy, for example. They put that money in. That investment gives them the right to live in Portugal. After 5, 6, 7 years, depending on whatever the terms of the fund are, they're able to withdraw that and continue on living in Portugal. It is also possible to donate, and typically the amount there is 250,000. So if you are feeling more generous and you are happy to donate that money and potentially not see it back, because after all, that's what a donation is, you could go down that route and it would cost you less. However, most people go for the 500,000 euro route simply because they want their 500,000 euros back at the end, and hopefully with some kind of return as well. Now, one big benefit of this that often isn't required by those who are thinking about moving to Portugal with savings is that the Golden Visa only requires you to spend an average of 7 days per year in Portugal. So this is very good if you simply want residency in Portugal and you don't want to live there full time necessarily, or you want a little bit of flexibility. So for example, you may want to have residency in Portugal now, you might want to start that process, but you're still living and working in another country where you're earning good money and you want to continue being able to do that. You can do that with the Golden Visa because you only need to spend 7 days on average per year in Portugal. Same if you're retired, for example, you may want to have a lot more freedom to be able to travel. The D7, the digital nomad visas, the other visas, they don't give you that level of flexibility. They expect you to spend the majority of time in Portugal. Another reason would be for tax purposes. So most visas expect you or assume you will become tax resident in Portugal because you are going to be living there and spending the majority of your time. The Golden Visa allows you to only spend an average of 7 days per year in Portugal as a minimum. So potentially you could avoid tax residency by spending less time in Portugal. Obviously consult with a lawyer, obviously consult with a financial expert on that. That can get quite complicated, but it is a possibility that the other visas typically do not offer. So that is the Golden Visa. Now, a lot of people don't want to go to the Golden Visa route for a number of reasons. One, they don't want 500,000 euros tied up for 5, 6, 10 years, whatever the requirements of the fund are. Two, the legal fees that come with it, the government fees, etc., they are typically higher than other visas, like the D7, for example. And three, in recent years, the processing time for the Golden Visa has been quite long. It has been longer than other visas, like the D7, for example. So it hasn't always been the best choice for those who actually want to move to Portugal. Now, what about the D7 visa? This is typically the one that people think about when they're thinking about moving to Portugal with savings. However, the D7 visa, it's nicknamed the passive income visa. And the reason for this is because to qualify, you need passive income. It isn't nicknamed the savings visa. Why? Because you can't really qualify for it with savings. However, you can, but not necessarily just by showing a lump sum in the bank, at least in most cases. Now, Portugal isn't a black and white country, so there have been a few cases that I've put on the Portugalist website where people have shown a lump sum in the bank, often combined with some form of passive income, but at least mainly a portion of their application has been a lump sum and they have been successful. But generally speaking, you should assume that you will need passive income for this. So, what is passive income? It's something like a pension, US Social Security, dividends, rental income, etc. This is all income that's paid out to you on a regular basis. You don't actively work for it now, although with a pension or Social Security or something like that, you will have worked for that at some point. But right now you don't, and it's more or less guaranteed to come in. Now, you could have problems with tenants if you're a landlord, but generally speaking, with most of these, with things like pensions or social security, the Portuguese government know that you're going to be getting a specific amount every month or every so often, and they can rely on that. Unlike a lump sum, which they don't know if you're going to spend all of that money on a house or something else and run out of money and become a burden on the Portuguese state. So, can you move to Portugal on the D7 visa with savings? Yes, as long as those savings are used to generate passive income. So, there's a couple of different ways that this could be done. For example, you could take that money and you could buy a rental property, use the rental income to qualify for the D7 visa. Interest is another example of passive income. Now, unfortunately, a lot of banks don't pay great interest these days, and it can be variable, but some do. Now, say for example that you were able to find a savings account that paid you 3% interest, which is probably an average of what we've seen over the last few years. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. The Portuguese government for the D7 visa wants you to have €870 per month as an individual in 2025. Now, that is roughly 10,500 in annual passive income. To generate this at 3% interest, you would need to have around €348,000 in savings. The money for the D7 needs to come from external sources, so this would probably be in a currency other than the euro, but that just gives you an example of how much you would need. Now, I would speak to a lawyer or immigration professional about this when applying because savings can be seen as a lump sum. So you need to make sure it's presented in a way that shows that you are showing the passive income as your part of your application rather than the lump sum. Now, dividends is another example. If you have an investment and you have a 3% annual return on your investment through dividends, this could be used for the D7 application as well. Now, what about those from the EU, the EEA, or Switzerland? Now, as I mentioned before, people from this part of the world have a much easier time in moving to Portugal. Often, all they need to do is go down to their Câmara Municipal, which is the town hall, go in there, register for residency. Some people report that the process took them 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, so very fast. And during that time, you are expected to show how you will support yourself financially in Portugal. So, for example, a pension, you are planning to get a local job, you have a remote job, you have savings, etc. However, the scrutiny level there isn't the same as it is for visas. Now, just because they don't look into things in the same level of detail, that doesn't mean that you should be very casual about moving to Portugal with minimal savings. We know from the Portuguese minimum wage, which comes to around 10,500 per year, we know that is the minimum that it costs to live in Portugal. So if you have €50,000 in the bank, you're going to run out before year 5. If you have 100,000, you're going to run out before year 10. Now, being an EU citizen does allow you to move to Portugal without having to think everything through. So you can move here with savings. You can move here and try and get a job or just think about starting a business and not really know when you move here exactly how you're going to support yourself. You do have that flexibility, which is nice. However, is it the smartest thing to do to come to Portugal without a fully thought out plan? I don't know, because the job market is limited, especially if you don't speak Portuguese, especially if you're living in a rural area. The cost of living is always a little bit higher than you think. And those people that have an idea for a business Often it isn't fully thought out. It certainly doesn't always have a business plan. Sometimes it's something that is already well saturated. For example, people often think about starting a guest house. There are a lot of guest houses in Portugal, or starting a service for expats. Typically, that is very, very saturated because the all the other expats who came before you have thought about doing that, or they're thinking about teaching English. Portuguese people speak excellent English. That's not to say there isn't some demand for it there, but there are also plenty of English speakers in Portugal teaching English. Just because it is easier to move as an EU, EEA, or Swiss citizen, don't neglect the savings aspect. I would say it's very easy for things to cost more than you expect in Portugal or in any new country that you move to, and it is very, very important to have a safety net. Now, if you did enjoy this video, and I really hope that you did, you will find more helpful content that answers your questions about moving to Portugal on Portugalist.com. If you would like to have a chat about moving to Portugal with savings and discuss some of the options there, like the Golden Visa, the D7, for example, please get in touch, Portugalist.com/chat, or use the contact form on the website. If you liked this video and you want to see more of it, and you want to see less of the other junk that YouTube shows you, click like, click subscribe. That way you're more likely to get this to show up in your feed. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.